Good morning, everybody. Mike Trzynski here with you again on a Saturday. And I just concluded a series on the soul of man. We talked about the mind, the will, and the emotions. Last week I talked about perfectionism, a root of pride. Today I want to continue in on that frame and talk about pride. I believe that is one of the greatest sins, especially in the life of a Christian, spiritual pride especially. And I want to talk about some more fruits of pride. But before we get into that, I want to give you what I believe is the greatest example of pride in a man. Obviously, Lucifer doesn't count because he was an angel, where he said, I'll be like the Most High. In Daniel chapter 4, we have the story of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and how he took many Jewish captives, young boys, including Daniel, who's about 16 years old here. And Nebuchadnezzar has a dream or a vision of a tree, and he can't get any interpretation from it from his wise men, so he hears about Daniel. He brings him in, and Daniel has this gift of interpreting dreams, and he says, you, Nebuchadnezzar, are the tree. In chapter 4, he gives the interpretation of it, beginning in verse 25. He says, you will be driven away from mankind, and your dwelling place will be with the beasts of the field, and you'll be given grass to eat like cattle, and be drenched with the dew of heaven. And 7 periods of time, which means 7 years, will pass over you until you recognize that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind and bestows it on whomever he wishes. I mean, that's pretty devastating. And I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar thought about this for a while, and yet some time goes by. It says here in verse 28 or 29, 12 months later. So a period of time goes by here, probably forgets about it, didn't happen, kid didn't know what he was talking about, kind of a deal. But 12 months later, he was walking on the roof of his royal palace in Babylon. And the king reflected and said, here's the pride. Is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty? Now, isn't this interesting? First of all, it wasn't built for his honor or majesty. It was built for security. All those cities were built to keep enemies out. And then he says, I have built it. I doubt if he even lifted a brick. It was his subjects, his servants, that did it all. So he's a mountain of pride. And he's moving in this and strutting and vaunting himself. And then all of a sudden in verse 31, while the word was in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven saying, King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it has been declared, sovereignty has been removed from you. You'll be driven away from mankind. Your dwelling place will be the beasts of the field. You'll be given grass to eat like cattle, 7 periods of time passing over you until you recognize the Most High, his ruler over the realm of mankind. The exact words that Daniel gave. And immediately, it says in verse 33, it happens to him. This word is fulfilled. He's driven away from mankind, stark mad, if you will. You wonder, what are his servants thinking here? Maybe they're hoping he recovers. And this is Nebuchadnezzar the Great. And for 7 years, his hair grows out like eagle's feathers, his nails like bird's claws. I'll bet that caused some conversation in the palace, in the whole kingdom, really. And, God, it says in the scriptures, various places, resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And it's like he delights in abasing people who are moving in tremendous pride. And it was a mercy to him that his life is still in him. He's kept alive. But then In verse 34, Daniel 4, he raises his eyes toward heaven. After 7 years, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. There's some more accounts of this. In 36, it says, At that time my reason returned to me. My majesty and splendor were restored, glory of my kingdom, all of that. Sovereignty, greatness is added to me. In studying this with some commentators, they said only 2 more years elapsed before Nebuchadnezzar died, if I'm recalling that correctly. So it wasn't a prolonged monarchy here. After this whole period of 7 years of abasement, he recovers for 2 years and then dies. Nebuchadnezzar would be more than a man, and God makes him justly less of a man. It was a mercy that really he was kept alive. And he looks up to heaven like a humble petitioner for mercy. Didn't even know what happened to him in those 7 years. His reasoning was gone, his memory. But then he returns and he glorifies God, and his kingdom and prosperity are reestablished, dignity restored after God honors him. Afflictions only last no longer than they have done the work for which they were meant to do. I want to give you a definition of pride here before we look at the fruits of pride. I got this years ago, probably Bible school. Pride, an unreasonable conceit of one's own superiority in talents, beauty, wealth, or status. That pretty much covers it all, doesn't it? A person who elevates himself is moving in pride. And the opposite, true humility, is willing to be known for who you really are. And we need to understand and hate pride the way God does. Being an effective and revived Christian requires a good concept of God's incredible love and character, the ugliness of sin, and the distance between them. Pride will keep you from wanting to change and consequently from growth. So I think spiritual pride is probably the worst of all of them, because in a Christian's life, if you start touching the glory, if you will, and not giving glory to God, you take it upon yourself, thinking like Nebuchadnezzar, I have healed, I have prospered, I have done all these things, and you don't give true recognition and honor to God. You're moving in pride. Maybe you're not going to be turned into an oxen roaming around fields and woods for 7 years, but there will be a diminishing lack of spirituality in your life because of pride. I'm not talking about one instance, I'm talking about a continual lifestyle of it, if you will. So here's the first fruit of pride from the workbook here, possess the land. The fruit of pride is competition. You might think, well, a lot of our culture and society is based on competition. Sports, games, shows, these things. There's a natural sense of competition, but then there's also a pride with competition. Definition: constant striving to excel above another, to be first, to be better, to be recognized. A description of a person moving like this: selfish, self-willed, self-exaltation. Do you see something in common here? Self, self, self. Ambitious, envious, constantly comparing oneself to another, which it says not to do in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12. I'm going to look at Galatians here for a minute. Enmity between men is the result of pride in competition. You will distance yourself from people when you start to exalt yourself. They'll want nothing to do with you. Enmity between men. Galatians 5:26. Let us not become boastful, challenging one another, envying one another. And then drop down a few verses, chapter 6, verse 3. For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Isn't that interesting? So, discontentment. A person moving in pride cannot be content with life or anything done in the past. It's got to be current, what's happening now. And he's exalting himself in the current situation, causing jealousy and envy within himself and maybe even other people that he associates with. The conclusion: pride is a root that can never be satisfied. Here's a great quote: constant striving with God and man brings a spirit of competition that will absorb a life and keep him from functioning in his calling and role in life. I think that's so important. I want to read it again. Constant striving with God and man brings a spirit of competition that absorbs a life and keeps him from functioning in his calling and role in life. In the church, you're a leader. If you see people operating in pride, especially spiritual pride, you're not going to want to esteem them. You're not going to want to promote them into a place of leadership. You are going to be aware of that and try to get them to see what they're operating in and cultivate the opposite spirit, which is humility. Another one, a fruit of pride, is unforgiveness. You become bitter, estranged, touchy, angry. The results of unforgiveness: guilt and condemnation. You can't release other people to be who they are. You don't have God's release, which is forgiveness. And you can't forgive yourself for your own past. People who constantly dwell in the past, how they messed up, how they missed the mark, how they sinned, if that's continually operating in them, that is the fruit of pride, unforgiveness. They can't forgive themselves. And they can't receive God's forgiveness. They're constantly bringing up garbage from the past. Pride will keep a person from forgiving himself because he has broken the image self-pride has built. That's pretty interesting. And the result of that is blindness and deception. You try to tell people, you've got to get over this. You've got to forget the past. Paul even said, forgetting the things that lie behind, reaching forward to what lies ahead. And they're like, well, you just don't understand how I did that, how that could happen to me, how I chose to blah, blah, blah. When you get a person like that, it's very difficult to peel the scales off of his eyes so he can see clearly what's happening here. Conclusion here: pride would hold forth a false sense of justice when self must be vindicated. Pride calls for retribution rather than forgiveness. And the last one here, a fruit of pride, is unbelief. Definition: the nature of pride is to be independent and self-sufficient. Have you ever run into people that, I don't need anybody, I don't want any help? They're operating in pride. They think they're being independent and self-sufficient, which they are. But what is the role of the believer? One must acknowledge a need, a deficiency, a limitation. So unbelief seeks to establish independence and self-sufficiency so that no one else is needed. Pride is the root of unbelief. We need the body. We need God more than everything. But we need the body as well. All the members working together. So one cannot believe God and seek the glory of men. I like John here, chapter 5 and verse 44. Jesus speaking to the Pharisees, he says, how can you believe when you receive glory from one another and you do not seek the glory that is from the one and only God? That's what the Pharisees were doing. They were seeking the glory from one another and not from the Lord. So pride desires the glory of men. Faith desires the glory of God. We need to be dependent upon the Lord. When you start saying, oh, I've got a lot of experience in this gift or talent or whatever, it's like you're saying, Lord, I've got this. I can handle this. I really don't need your help here. You may not be mouthing those words, but that's the attitude of the heart. We needed to be dependent upon everything. Jesus said, without me, you can do nothing. I believe that. So pride seeks to possess itself of God's blessings, characterized by striving with God. Psalm 46:10. Cease striving and know that I am God. Working faith principles for personal goals rather than seeking God's will for life. What does that mean? There's a whole, mindset here about faith, which is true. But when we start using faith principles for our own personal benefit, goals, possessions, whatever, people years ago called it name it and claim it. You probably remember that if you've been around for years. It's believing for your own personal benefit. And the gifts, as you know, are to bless other people. So refusing to seek God's will and pleasure in one's life is operating in pride. And lastly here, faith and humility are in the same root. Humility prepares the soul for trust. Examples: the centurion said, Lord, I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. Only speak the word and my servant will be healed. And then the Syrophoenician woman, a Gentile, asking Jesus to heal her daughter, deliver her from a demon. And the Lord says, his answer, in a sense, he's saying deliverance is for the children of Israel. And she says, yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. That's humility. And she was given the answer. Her daughter was delivered from the demon. So faith doesn't grow from the root of pride. It grows from these roots, these fruits here. Next week, I want to talk about how to cut the root of pride after we go over a few more manifestations of pride, symptoms of it, and also how to cultivate humility, because that is the reason, or the remedy rather. That is how you will avoid pride, is to walk in humility. So we'll cover that next week. Until then, have a blessed day, and we'll see you next time.